If you were asked to name one of the most complex and controversial figures in black entertainment, Stepin Fetchit would have to be near the top of the list. On one hand, Stepin Fetchit is widely celebrated for becoming the first black millionaire actor. He was the first black actor to be credited in motion pictures in the late 1920s, and he paved the way for black actors in media. On the other hand, Stepin Fetchit is criticized for perpetuating negative black stereotypes. The character Stepin Fetchit was portrayed as the laziest man in the world. He talked with a slow speech and he mispronounced words, and he spent his time shucking and jiving for his white counterparts. He was bashed by Bill Cosby and the NAACP. Imagine that. Interestingly enough, the actor who played Stepin Fetchit, Lincoln Perry, was an intelligent man who wrote a weekly column for the Chicago Defender. Many think the character Stepin Fetchit slowed down black progress. Like when whites went to go see his films, they got their opinion of blacks from him, and he received backlash for it. However, before the backlash, Fetchit spent over a decade on top of the world. Audiences didn't immediately see him as the Uncle Tom coon archetype that he would soon be vilified for. Like, that came later on down the road. Hi, I'm Zooman Miller, and this is a story you should know. In the early 1900s, a Jamaican man worked as a cigar wrapper in addition to being an aspiring minstrel performer. A Bahamian woman, who identified as a devout Catholic, worked as a seamstress. The two got together and had Lincoln Theodore Monroe Andrew Perry in Key West, Florida in 1902. Perry's mother wanted him to be a dentist, but it was clear that Perry had entertainment on his mind, which probably came from his father. Yeah, my boy was always tapping his feet. He would just sit down to eat a meal, and under the table his feet would go a tap, tap, tap. In 1914, Perry's life would change because his mother died and her children were placed in foster care. Just 2 years would go by and Perry would leave home to finally pursue his dreams of being in show business. He worked for a medicine show that traveled all around. Because Perry was inexperienced, shows like this gave him a chance to show off his tap dancing skills. Like, he'd been practicing all this time. He originally went under the name Rostas, the buck dancer. As Perry approached his 20s, his versatility as a performer began to shine through. As he'd been moving up the ladder from the medicine and tent shows to carnivals and eventually black circuit theaters. At the time, Perry was also writing as an entertainment critic for the Chicago Defender. The weekly column was called Lincoln Perry Writes, and then turned into Lincoln Perry's Letter. The weekly column raised his profile amongst all of his peers. After being introduced to the black circuit, Perry began performing in black vaudeville shows as one half of a duo called Stepin Fetchit. Now, there are several reports that Perry took the name Stepin Fetchit from a racehorse that had won him some cash. In Stepin Fetchit, The Life and Times of Lincoln Perry, author Mel Watkins took a quote from Perry about the origins of his name. Dancing and singing for a number of years, Perry took the name of the racehorse and teamed up with a partner, Buck Abel. Abel was Step and Perry was Fetchit. According to the Library of Congress, Perry's partner Abel became hospitalized, which forced Perry to join a friend, Ed Lee, and the two toured. In 1927, as part Lincoln Perry's Letter, he announced that he started to work as a single. I will close with Stepin Fetchit, yours truly himself, minus the partner, playing the Maralta Theater. After taking Stepin Fetchit as his own, Perry's career took a turn and skyrocketed. That same year, Perry appeared in the 1927 film In Old Kentucky, his breakout film. Perry's sister, Lucille, remembered her brother auditioning for MGM. He said he just stood there looking like he didn't know where he was or why he was there. And he was scratching his head, which he had shaved clean. He shaved his head clean and he was looking around like he was lost. And I guess he looked so sad and lost at everything that he got their attention. They liked it. Lucille said the dumber he acted, the more the executives laughed, and because nobody had ever seen anybody that slow and ignorant. Perry was immediately told he got the part. In Old Kentucky was a silent drama, and he played the role of High Pockets. Despite being a silent film, Perry's performance was so strong, he signed a 5-year contract with the Fox Film Corporation after it was released. In Old Kentucky was a great start to the career for Stepin Fetchit. After the film was released, Perry continued to act in films and his popularity rose with each film. 1929 was Perry's busiest year in show business, one of them being Hearts and Dixie, which was one of the first studio films that featured a predominantly black cast. For the film, Perry received top billing. High demand was an understatement for Perry. There were times when he'd be working up to 4 films at the same time. There were scenes in movies that were written specifically for him, and he was usually the top act. At the height of his career, Perry was labeled the first black film star and the first black entertainer to make $1 million. Boy, you don't get to that bag. At the height of his success, Perry married 17-year-old Dorothy Stevenson in 1929. Their marriage resulted in a son. In 1931, Dorothy filed for divorce from Perry, claiming he broke her nose, jaw, and arm. Dorothy even told the reporters that she wished someone would beat the devil out of him like he did her. After their divorce, Dorothy was diagnosed with tuberculosis in 1933. Perry had moved her to Arizona to get treatment, but she died the following year. Perry loved living a life of luxury too, as he often spent money just as fast as he made it. The amount of films he was making in a single year allowed him to do that. Anything money could buy, I had 14 Chinese servants in all different kinds of cars. Whew, what? This one, a pink Rolls Royce. It had my name on the side of it in neon lights. And my suits. But suits cost $1,000 each, man. I showed people just because I had $1 million that the world wouldn't come to an end. Throughout the 1930s, Perry appeared in over 28 films. The characters he played were Swifty, Gummy, Hokey, Bulger, and Snowshoes. His clothes were shabby and he was unkempt. He was unable to correctly pronounce a word that was more than 3 syllables and was constantly scratching his head, acting like he didn't have a clue. What was once funny and successful was now seen as embarrassing and offensive. In 1937, it was reported that Perry married Winifred Johnson. However, there's no record of the marriage. Their relationship also resulted in a child, another son, Donald Martin Perry. Soon after Donald's birth, Perry and Johnson, their relationship ended. It's been reported that, like his first marriage, Perry also had an abusive relationship with Johnson. According to Johnson's brother, Stretch, Perry knocked Winifred down a flight of stairs and broke her nose. Winifred's father had to intervene. Winifred eventually filed a suit against Perry for child support, and Perry was arrested in 1941. By the time the 1940s arrived, Perry's fame had gotten the best of him. He became demanding and exhibited belligerent behavior on the set. Perry's attitude was such a constant occurrence, his co-stars, producers, directors, all began leaving him out of scenes. Around this time, Perry found himself as the victim of criticism from the people he once represented. Black Americans started to reject Perry, as they thought he embodied some of the worst stereotypes of blacks. Walter White, executive secretary of the NAACP, said, Stepin Fetchit was a problem and he urged movie studios to end demeaning portrayals of blacks. Stepin Fetchit's laziest man in the world routine was now offensive and all the way played out. Author of Shuffling to Ignominy, The Tragedy of Stepin Fetchit, Champ Clark said, the name Stepin Fetchit came to be the ultimate term for negative racism stereotypes. Nobody wanted anything to do with Lincoln Perry, and he was devastated by that. Around 1940, Perry went on strike due to the lack of equal pay compared to his white counterparts. Unfortunately for Perry, by the time he initiated the strike, Hollywood was already done with him. The criticism from Perry's own community and his hard-to-work-with reputation was enough for the industry to just move on. And that's what they did. In the 1940s, Perry had roles in 2 feature films compared to the 28 he was just in a decade earlier. Things would get worse because Perry's excessive spending would finally catch up with him. In 1947, Perry filed for bankruptcy and relied on his nightclub performances for income. As the civil rights movement gained momentum, Perry's Stepin Fetchit act would continue to fall out of favor and was accused of promoting negative stereotypes through the character. And even with all the criticism, Perry continued to defend the character that made him a fortune. I became the first Negro entertainer to become a millionaire. All the things that Bill Cosby and Sidney Poitier have done wouldn't even be possible if I hadn't broken that law. Now, I set the thrones up for him to come out and sit on. Comedian J.J. Walker, who has also been accused of promoting negative stereotypes in media, had also given his thoughts on Stepin Fetchit. The way they make it sound is like black people are permanently harmed by Stepin Fetchit. And I don't agree with that. I don't think it's a bad character. I think it's just a funny character. J.J. Walker. Those who defend Stepin Fetchit claim that the character fell into the trickster category. The lazy man character that Perry played was based on something that had come from slavery. It was called putting on old massa. You know, break tools, break the hole, do anything to postpone the work that was supposed to be done. And blacks understood it perfectly and laughed heartily at it. Mel Watkins. Eventually, the white character would become annoyed and just end up doing the work themselves. Now, the character had outsmarted the white man by playing dumb. Perry appeared in 3 films in the 1950s. All 3 were cameo roles. Struggling to stay relevant in the times, Perry attempted to form a production company and planned on filming the lives of boxer Jack Johnson and baseball player Satchel Paige. The intent was to document black athletes. Unfortunately, Perry's efforts wouldn't amount to anything. In 1968, CBS released the documentary Black History, Lost, Stolen, or Strayed, which laid out the countless contributions blacks have made in American history. The documentary was narrated by Bill Cosby, who said, "The tradition of lazy, stupid, crap-shooting, chicken-stealing idiot was popularized by an actor named Lincoln Theodore Monroe Andrew Perry. The cat made $2 million in 5 years in the middle of the 1930s, and everyone who saw a movie laughed at Stepin Fetchit." Part of the documentary criticized the depiction of blacks in media, and Stepin Fetchit was singled out. As a result, Perry attempted to sue CBS for defamation of character. Perry felt the documentary labeled him as the white man's Negro, holding him up to hatred and contempt and ridicule. Perry sued for $3 million. In 1974, the suit was dismissed. A federal judge said that the remarks were made towards his role, not the actor personally. Perry felt the documentary ruined his reputation. Perry's son Donald was heavy into black nationalism and turned on his father because of all the criticism he received. Perry was shunned and embarrassed by his own son, and that devastated him. On April 5th, in 1969, a motorist on the Pennsylvania Turnpike told a toll collector that shots were fired at him. Police were notified and arrived on the scene. However, by the time of their arrival, Donald Perry, now going under the surname of his stepfather Lambright, had gone on a shooting spree that lasted nearly an hour and covered 20 miles. Lambright was firing shots at approaching traffic and cars that passed from the right. Lambright killed 50-year-old Ignatius Keenan and his wife Ruby. The 12-year-old son was wounded, along with 15 others. Lambright shot and killed his wife, Annette, and then turned the gun on himself. This was a high-profile case for maybe like a week until it disappeared from headlines. The case was ruled a murder-suicide and quickly closed. Donald met his father only once in Chicago just a year or 2 before the shootings. Donald told his uncle that meeting Perry was an unpleasant experience. He felt that Stepin Fetchit didn't really treat him like his son, but instead he treated him with hostility. Now, Donald had no disrespect for his father. Donald was very radical, in his political orientation, and he regarded Stepin Fetchit as an obstacle to black progress, said Howard Johnson. For Donald, having his father looked at as an Uncle Tom, that bothered him. Infuriated him even. They would ask, how can an Uncle Tom produce such a militant? After being absent from film in the 60s, Perry appeared in just 3 films in the 70s. His last film role was the dancing butler in Won Ton Ton, The Dog Who Saved Hollywood in 1976. Perry was awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for his contributions to film. And despite the criticisms he received, guess who? Guess. The NAACP awarded him a special NAACP Image Award for his valuable contribution in artistic excellence and for bringing joy, respect, and dignity into our lives. 2 years later, Perry was inducted into the Black Filmmakers Hall of Fame. In 1976, Perry suffered a stroke and spent the last years of his life in the motion picture television country house and hospital. His career, now well past him, and reputation nearly ruined and his fortune gone, Perry spent the last decade of his life out of the spotlight. Spending his last years in the hospital, Perry died on November 19th, 1985 from pneumonia and heart failure at 83. In 2020, to be called Stepin Fetchit is an insult. Make you swing on somebody. The career of Lincoln Perry proves why evolving with the times is important for an artist or entertainer. Perry's inability to do so is what ended his career. Despite the negative perception, Perry did break barriers with the roles and made history. Thanks to Stepin Fetchit, a lot of money was made, but some would argue how it was made.